Clara's life was a mix of routine and pressure. Every day was the same for her. Early mornings, black coffee with no sugar, a folder full of papers under her arm, and endless hours at the office. She had everything anyone would call success. A shining diploma on the wall, well-paying clients, and a solid reputation as a criminal lawyer. But there was something no one saw in her, a quiet emptiness. Clara wasn't fond of small talk. To be honest, she avoided it. Not because she was unfriendly, but because she simply preferred to keep things organized. In her mind, emotions made a mess of things. And who wants chaos when you can have control? But then, on an ordinary day, while walking through the city's crowded streets, something happened. Something small, almost imperceptible, that would change everything. It was late afternoon, and the sun was already beginning to disappear behind the tall buildings. Clara was heading home after another exhausting day in court. Her mind was occupied with laws, arguments, and strategies. Until, as she passed through a plaza, she saw Ethan. At first glance, he didn't stand out. Just another street kid, thin, wearing worn-out clothes, with tired eyes. But there was something about him. Maybe it was the way he held that piece of cardboard with the words, "Any help is welcome." Or maybe it was his eyes. Eyes that seemed to hold stories no one had ever heard. Clara stopped. Not because she felt pity, she wasn't that type. She stopped because, well, she wasn't exactly sure. It just felt wrong to walk past him. So, without thinking too much, she went to a nearby food stand and bought a sandwich and a soda. When she returned, she handed them to Ethan along with some coins she found at the bottom of her bag. "Here," she said, trying to sound casual. "It's nothing." Ethan hesitated. He looked at the food, then at Clara, as if trying to figure out what was behind the gesture. Finally, he accepted it with a small nod and a barely audible thanks. Clara expected nothing in return, not even a smile. To her, it was just an automatic act, almost mechanical. Something simple that anyone would do, or at least should do. But as she walked away, something strange happened. She started feeling like she was being watched. She turned quickly, but saw nothing but unfamiliar faces and passing cars. "Relax," she told herself. "You're just tired." When she got home, Clara tried to shake off the feeling. She turned on the TV, made some tea, and opened a book. Everything seemed normal. Until, suddenly, loud knocks echoed through her apartment. She frowned. Who could it be at this hour? She opened the door cautiously, and before she could say anything, uniformed men burst inside. Police officers. They turned everything upside down, asked questions Clara didn't understand, and treated her like a criminal. Then he appeared. Richard. A tall man in a flawless suit, with piercing eyes. He looked at her as if he could see right through her. "You helped a criminal," he said, his voice calm but laced with threat. Clara's jaw dropped. "What are you talking about?" Richard explained, or at least tried to. He said Ethan wasn't just a street kid, that he was involved in something big, something dangerous, and that the sandwich Clara gave him was now enough evidence to drag her into a mess she could barely begin to comprehend. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Her mind spun like a rusty gear. How could something so small, a simple sandwich, cause so much chaos? And what the hell was going on with Ethan? As the hours passed, Clara realized she needed to find out the truth. Not just to save herself, but because something inside her wouldn't let the story end there. There was more. So much more. She decided to investigate. She started slowly, gathering clues here and there. She visited places where Ethan might be, asked questions she shouldn't be asking, and little by little, she began to understand that the world was much bigger and much more complicated than she had imagined. But, of course, it wouldn't be easy. Every step she took seemed to bring more trouble. Suspicious men followed her. Cars slowed down as they passed her. And at one point, she almost got caught. She had been lucky to escape. Deep down, Clara knew she was wading into dangerous waters. Waters that could pull her under. But she also knew she couldn't just walk away. There was something here. Something important. And so, as the night stretched on and the streets grew emptier, Clara kept searching. Each step brought her closer to Ethan, and closer to truths she never imagined she'd have to face. Clara woke up to the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway of her building. It was early, too early, and she had barely gotten any sleep. Her mind was a whirlwind of unanswered questions. Ethan, Richard, that damn sandwich. Everything felt like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. She got up slowly, as if every movement could attract more trouble. Still dressed in the wrinkled clothes from the day before, she walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Down on the sidewalk, two men caught her attention. They pretended to read newspapers, but Clara knew they were there for her. The way they exchanged quick glances, adjusted the collars of their jackets, it was too obvious. "What the hell is going on?" she muttered to herself, rubbing her tired eyes. This wasn't paranoia. It was real. And worse, she had no idea who to trust. Determined not to sit around waiting for the next blow, Clara started forming a plan. First, she needed to understand who Ethan really was. He wasn't just a street kid, she was sure of that. But what did Richard want with him? And why was he so determined to frame her? With her heart pounding, Clara left the apartment. She took the back stairs, avoiding the elevator and the building's security guards. On the street, she blended into the morning crowd, trying not to draw attention. She knew she had to be careful. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart. Her first stop was the plaza where she had first met Ethan. Maybe someone there knew him. Maybe someone could give her a clue about his whereabouts. When she arrived, the place felt different. Emptier, quieter. Even the pigeons seemed to have disappeared. "You're looking for the boy, aren't you?" A raspy voice startled her. Clara turned quickly and saw an old man sitting on a bench, wrapped in a worn-out blanket. He had a graying beard and piercing eyes, like someone who had seen everything in life. "Who are you?" Clara asked, trying to stay calm. "I'm just a guy who watches," he shrugged. "But I can tell you one thing. That boy isn't what he seems. What do you know about him?" The man hesitated, as if debating whether he should speak. Finally, he sighed and said, "He runs with dangerous people. People who don't like questions. If I were you, I'd let this go." Clara frowned. "I can't do that." "Then good luck," he muttered, looking back down at the ground. That conversation only made Clara more restless. She knew she had to keep going, but where? Then, she remembered something. When Ethan accepted the food, he had mentioned a younger sister. He had said something about protecting her. Maybe that was the key. Determined, Clara began searching shelters and institutions that helped homeless children and teenagers. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but she had no other choice. 4 hours, she went from place to place, asking questions and hearing stories too tragic to be true. Until, finally, someone gave her a lead. "There's a new girl here," a volunteer at an improvised shelter told her. "She arrived a few days ago, alone. Doesn't talk much, but she mentioned an older brother." Clara felt a chill down her spine. "Where is she?" The volunteer pointed to a room in the back. Clara entered slowly, trying not to scare the girl. There she was, small, thin, with big, frightened eyes. She looked like a younger version of Ethan. "Hi," Clara said softly. "My name is Clara. Can I talk to you?" The girl hesitated, then nodded. "My name is Sophia," she murmured, barely audible. "Sophia, you have a brother, right?" "Ethan." The girl's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "I met him. He's okay, but he needs help. Can you tell me what happened?" Sophia started speaking, hesitant at first, but soon the words started flowing. She told Clara that Ethan had run away from home to protect her, that they had been taken by a group that promised work but instead used them for terrible things. Ethan managed to escape, but Sophia was left behind. Now, she was afraid that her brother would come back for her and end up getting caught. Clara felt a knot in her throat. Everything was starting to make sense. Ethan wasn't a criminal. He was a victim. And Richard was the real villain. But before Clara could think about her next move, The screech of tires outside made her freeze. 2 black cars pulled up in front of the shelter, and armed men jumped out. They stormed inside, turning everything upside down, shouting orders. "Run!" Clara whispered to Sophia, grabbing her hand. They slipped out through the back, rushing through narrow, dark alleys. The men's footsteps echoed behind them, getting closer. "Where are we going?" Sophia panted. "Anywhere but here," Clara answered, picking up the pace. They finally found refuge in an abandoned building. Clara barricaded the door with an old chair and tried to catch her breath. She looked at Sophia, who was trembling with fear, and felt a sharp pang of guilt. That girl didn't deserve to be here. No child did. "We'll find a way to get your brother out of this mess," Clara promised, even though she had no idea how. As the hours passed, Clara realized there was no turning back. She was in way over her head, caught in something far bigger than she understood. But she also knew she couldn't quit. Not now. In the silence of the abandoned building, Clara began to devise a new plan. A risky plan, maybe even an impossible one. But, as they say, sometimes you have to walk through fire to find the light. Night fell over the city like a heavy cloak, wrapping everything in shadows. Clara felt the weight of exhaustion on her back, but there was no time to rest. Sophia was curled up in a corner of the abandoned building, her soft breathing contrasting with the tension in the air. Clara watched the girl, trying to imagine what she had already endured, and what she might still face if things went wrong. She knew she had to find Ethan. Not just for him, but for Sophia too. That little girl deserved a chance to start over, far from the grasp of the man hunting them, Richard. His name echoed in Clara's mind like a funeral bell, reminding her that every second counted. But where to look? Ethan was a fugitive, someone who clearly knew how to hide. He wouldn't be easy to find. And even if she did find him, how could she ensure their safety? Richard's men seemed to be everywhere, like invisible ghosts appearing only when least expected. Clara decided to return to the starting point, the square where it all began. It was risky, of course, but something told her that Ethan might have left clues there. Maybe he believed no one would think to look for him in the most obvious place. Or maybe he wanted to be found. As she left the abandoned building, Clara felt the cold wind cut across her face. She pulled her coat tighter around her body, trying to shield herself not just from the chill but from the creeping sensation of being watched. Every step she took on the empty streets sounded amplified, as if the rhythm of her shoes against the concrete might attract unwanted attention. When she reached the square, everything looked the same. Empty benches, trees swaying in the wind, the fountain still and silent. But then, she noticed something different. A folded piece of paper beneath one of the benches. Something that certainly hadn't been there before. Clara hesitated for a moment. It could be a trap. It could be anything. But something inside her pushed her forward. She picked up the paper and carefully unfolded it. It was a short message, handwritten with shaky letters. Asterisk, if you really want to help, come alone to the old warehouse at the port. Ethan. Asterisk. Clara's heart raced. It was an invitation, or a setup. But she had no choice. If Ethan was willing to trust her, she had to do the same. On her way to the port, Clara mentally reviewed everything she knew so far. Richard was the leader of a human trafficking ring. Ethan and Sophia were victims of his operation, but Ethan had managed to escape. Now, Richard was determined to get them back, and somehow, Clara had become part of this story. When she arrived at the warehouse, the place looked straight out of a horror movie. Old, rusted, with broken windows and chains hanging from the doors. Clara took a deep breath and stepped inside. Inside, the air was damp and filled with dust. She spotted Ethan sitting in a corner, his face bruised and his eyes red. He looked exhausted, but there was something in his gaze that Clara immediately recognized. Fear. You came, Ethan said, his voice weak. I said I would help you, Clara replied, stepping closer. But I need to know the truth. Everything. Ethan hesitated but eventually spoke. He explained that Richard wasn't just a trafficker, he was a predator. He used children and teenagers as bait to lure vulnerable people in, promising work and safety. By the time the victims realized the truth, it was too late. Ethan and Sophia had been captured months ago, but he had managed to escape after a violent confrontation. Since then, he had been trying to protect his sister, but he knew Richard wouldn't give up so easily. "They're after me," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "But I won't let them take Sophia." Clara felt a lump in her throat. "We're going to get you both out of this," she promised. "But I need you to trust me." Before Ethan could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Clara and Ethan turned quickly, and there was Richard, tall, imposing, with a cruel smile on his lips. "What a touching scene," Richard said, clapping slowly. "But did you really think I'd let this continue?" Clara felt her blood turn cold. They were surrounded. Armed men began entering the warehouse, blocking every exit. It looked like the end. But Clara wasn't one to give up easily. Quickly, she grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him behind a stack of old crates. "Stay down," she whispered, trying to think of a plan. Richard walked toward them, his steps slow and calculated. "You know, Clara," he said, as if discussing the weather, "you've been an interesting piece in this game. I never imagined that such a meticulous lawyer would get so involved." "I'm not part of your game," Clara shot back, trying to buy time. "Oh, but you are," Richard replied with a cold smile. "From the moment you gave Ethan that sandwich, you walked straight into my web." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. He was right. That simple act of kindness had set off a chain of events that now put their lives in danger. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't have done anything differently. Not when someone needed help. As Richard kept talking, Clara noticed something, an old fire escape attached to the warehouse wall. If they could get to it, they might have a chance to escape. "Let's go," she whispered to Ethan, pointing to the stairs. The two of them moved carefully, trying not to make a sound. But, of course, Richard noticed. "Get them," he shouted, and his men started chasing them. It was a desperate race. Clara and Ethan climbed the stairs, stumbling over the rusted steps. Below them, the men shouted and fired shots, but none hit their target. When they finally reached the roof, Clara saw a way out, a narrow alley between two nearby buildings. "Jump," she told Ethan, pointing to the other side. "Are you crazy?" Ethan asked, staring at the gap between the buildings. "Trust me," Clara replied firmly. With his heart pounding, Ethan jumped first. He almost slipped, but managed to grab onto the ledge. Clara followed right after, and the two of them landed in the alley with a heavy thud. They quickly got up and kept running, never looking back. When they finally found a safe hiding place, Clara realized they had made it. At least for now. But she knew this wasn't over. Richard wouldn't give up so easily. They needed a bigger plan. And fast. As she caught her breath, Clara looked at Ethan. He seemed scared, but also determined. "We're going to get your sister out of this," she said with conviction. "Together." Ethan nodded. His eyes filled with unshed tears. "Thank you," he murmured. Clara knew there was still a long road ahead. Many dangers, many difficult decisions. But deep down, she also knew she had made the right choice. Because sometimes, kindness isn't about changing the world. It's about changing a life. And that, she realized, was enough.